Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? So I study infant visual cognition, and typically I do that exclusively in a lab with babies. So I saw some of my other colleagues were talking about doing infant research as well. Normally, I have infant participants come to the lab and we use eye tracking and EEG and other really precise measures to kind of estimate what's going on neurally and cognitively based on their observable eye movement performance. So how does somebody like me get involved in online testing toddlers of all things? So it's been sort of a long, windy road, but as probably was the case for my colleagues as well, it was necessity that pushed me to this. So I had, at another institution that I was at, tested a really large longitudinal sample of infants. So I was up to about 300 infants, and I was collecting really high fidelity, high sample, eye tracking, all across their first year of life with the hopes of following these kids forever. But I ended up moving to a bigger institution, which was great, but I had to let go of this incredible infant sample. And so as these babies were nearing about their 4-year-old birthday, this was a few years ago now, I thought I had to find a way to follow up with these kids. And just fortuitously, one of my graduate students had helped me with that project when she was an undergrad. So we were looking for a cheap way to follow up with the families. We knew we couldn't bring them in and do eye tracking, but we wanted to get a sense of how their infant visual behaviors produced sort of detectable differences in school readiness. So we decided to just take a shot at this. I had no reason to believe it was going to work, but I decided to program versions of my visual attention tasks and my visual memory tasks, usually exclusively based on saccadic reaction time, as behavioral tasks. So translating them into something that a toddler could do that was kind of fun and then involved in actual behavior like a button press. So I had no idea at all if this was going to work, and even if kids would do it, if it would produce desired behaviors, interesting behaviors. So I naively went forth, and I have a programming background, so I built the games myself. I fought through that. It was difficult, ended up having to do a lot of infrastructure that I wasn't prepared for at all, and ended up engaging in a long battle with IRB and our network administrators to try to host these downloadable games. So I had come up with this idea of creating games that were exact replicas of what their infants had participated in. So the placement was absolutely perfect, the syncing, the timing, the sounds, exactly the same. It just required that they downloaded these games. So time from my first sort of idea of this to actually collecting the first data, about 4 months, which maybe doesn't sound too bad, but it was all I worked on for those 4 months. So it was really front end heavy in terms of work. I was really happy with how it turned out. So these are the instructions. We had to do a lot of piloting. I don't know anything about toddlers, but we ended up coming up with really great versions of these behavioral tasks that appeared to be something that the toddlers would actually engage in. So that was our first hurdle. So in general, it worked. Kids seemed to understand the tasks. We were sort of training the parents to teach their kids how to do it. It was totally unsupervised, and they seemed to enjoy it. So they understood it and they enjoyed it. We only had just started looking at the data when we were realizing that it was unsustainable. So the problem was we were getting quite a few emails from parents with questions about the downloads and the security warnings and the nag screens from the operating systems. And the bugs, this is not a trivial thing. The bugs that went along with trying to produce a piece of software for such an incredibly diverse testing environment. So Macs, PCs, every configuration you can name. So I'm not going to go through this. I know we all have other things that we're wanting to get to. There were a lot of pros and cons to this downloadable app approach. I was happy with it. I got the results from the sample I wanted. Things I really liked. I'm kind of a control freak, at least so perceptually, the characteristics. I had complete control over how it looked and how it sounded. I wrote the task myself, so I was able to get the data how I wanted it. I didn't have any concerns about network congestion or browser issues, and I could sort of control the experience, at least visually. The cons were, it was a lot of research and development trying to figure out what typical computing environments are at home, the kinds of devices parents would typically have, and it really limited what I could do visually. And all of the infrastructure stuff I was really naive thinking it was going to be so simple. That was a significant hassle. So I left that experience. It's been about 3 years ago now, thinking, oh, it kind of worked. Toddlers maybe are okay. Don't know if I'm ever going to have to do that again. And then COVID hit. So as soon as it became clear that this was maybe going to be our new, jumping the gun, that this was maybe going to be our new testing reality for the foreseeable future, I thought maybe we could revisit this online testing thing. So by this time, there was a lot of traffic on the listservs. I was hearing about a lot of different apps. Several of my colleagues here posted comments to the listservs that I was reading. And so my lab and I sort of set out to do a whole bunch of research and try to find the best software that would allow us to produce a mobile game, developing in any environment we wanted to develop, that was relatively cheap. Again, not wanting to spend a huge amount of money on the front end if I wasn't certain I was going to be able to get meaningful behavior on the back end. Really quickly for us, it came down to Gorilla and LabVanced. They're both great, but Gorilla and Joe and the support I got was just amazing. So we went with Gorilla and basically replicated our previous approach. And this time, when I replicated the process I had before, I was able to go from first inception to actual data collection within about 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and we were really excited with the results. So here's pros and cons of using a browser-based approach. Again, I don't have to go into the details here. I have it on the screen if you guys want to read this, because there really was a lot involved in these decisions. But the things I really liked about the way this was working with Gorilla was this effortless handling of multiple operating systems and resolutions. I couldn't say enough about that. And so I was a little concerned about the visual scaling for small display sizes, but it ended up working really well. And visual angle, it turns out, is pretty tightly linked. The scale size is pretty tightly linked with how far away users were holding it from their face. So not exact precision, obviously, is what we're getting in a lab, but a great sort of interim solution. So no infrastructure overhead. Parents could quit and come back to the task, which I didn't appreciate going into this, but ended up being a really big deal for parents. Really nice that they could just click the same link and go right back to where they were. And here's the big thing that was great. It's simple enough that undergrads could learn and help programming. So before, it's all on my shoulders. Now I have a whole lab of students who can help me do this. So the only big con really was the control of the visual layout and the audio layout. So not as much control as I would get, obviously, if I were creating my own apps. But I have come to the decision that this, even for somebody who's really obsessed with visual specifics, this was a good solution for us. So results, in this first sample, now we've collected 104 subjects already. We have complete data on all of our tasks and surveys for 104. We have partial data for at least another 50 to 75 subjects. And so far we've tested an age range of like about 4.5 to 6.5. And this is one of our visual tasks. So these are results from our working memory capacity, like a visual working memory task, visual short-term memory. So results, quick, this was a real quick result. I pulled these down just a few days ago, getting ready for the talk. Results demonstrate just gorgeous developmental effects. So we see significant increases in visual working memory capacity as a function of age here. So age is continuous, but I divided it into these really nice age categories. So really nice behavioral results. So button press results producing the exact pattern of developmental change that we expect based on really high level in-lab precise data. So results from my visual attention task, here I had really low expectations. This is something that's usually, the condition effects that I see in this task are usually at the level of tens of milliseconds. Wasn't sure that these visual cueing effects were going to translate to button press effects. Again, we see absolutely gorgeous condition effects. So all of the effects that I expected for manipulating sort of cue target competitiveness showed up very nicely in button press results. So in this task, we found that a lot of the front end effort was sort of oriented around coming up with, we tried to come up with a game approach. We tried to come up with a set of instructions for parents. What ended up working really well was just making the task itself very enticing and making the training really easy, really discoverable. So the kids are really good at picking up on how to play a game. And one of the other really nice things about Gorilla was if they were doing this on a tablet or a touchscreen device, we were able to make the targets touch capable. So toddlers were either performing this task with keys on a keyboard or by touching the touch screen. And when they would quickly press to touch a target, they would hear really exciting bubble pop sounds. It turns out that's really rewarding for kids. They'll do anything for bubble pop sounds. Grad students as well. So we didn't have any trouble piloting this in our lab. So behaviorally, the task went very well. And I solicited comments after every task from the parents. This was something I learned my first time around. Really important to get feedback from the parents and how their kids were doing. Do they think their kids were getting it? And it was just glowing. Kids loved it. For example, in this attention task, I think all but maybe 5 or 6 of the kids performed all 120 trials. So lots of data, lots of what looks like really precise, nice data. Cost-wise, Gorilla is totally affordable. The thing that you do have to consider is that for these online sort of unsupervised approaches, the incentive is important. So we have been successful giving away $10 Amazon gift card credits. That has been sufficient to keep participation high. So cost-wise, that ends up being where the big cost is. So I was interested, being, we totally centricity, visual, typically controlling that very, very tightly. I really wanted to know what the average testing environment was like, really what my task looks like to the average participant. So this is another nice feature that you can get for free from the Gorilla data. You can see what they were testing on. You can see what the average resolution is. And this is my sample. So again, these are just the 104 good subjects. You can see basically what device they're connecting with when they're taking the task. This iPhone is a bit of an oops. When I saw that, I realized I had failed to to remove that from eligibility. So I've taken that off now. But somebody got all the way through the task on an iPhone and the data actually looked pretty darn good. So most typically, and this is what I saw with my downloadable game approach, standard, less laptop, standard size desktop, typically around in the 1300, pixel resolution range, which that really is the most typical. So I was interested to see if the size of the monitor affected performance in this task. I suspect the attention task may be more heavily influenced by monitor size and total eccentricity. But what I looked at first was, this is all I'm going to show. I didn't really prepare a data talk, but I thought you might be interested to see working memory capacity as a function of monitor resolution. Now, overall, this analysis was non-significant. So I didn't see any evidence to suggest that monitor size, any significant evidence to suggest that monitor size was influencing how we're measuring our sort of cognitive output. But looking at the task, you can see some interesting suggestions. So obviously, we see some effects when the monitors are getting really big, and the iPhone, this is just strange skewed data. Even when I remove this from the analysis, though, it's still not significant. So that's really comforting. That was really comforting to me. So in summary, some of the strengths of this approach, of browser-specific approach, and things that I think Gorilla, as probably one of the best browser-based approaches, handles really well, is this OS operating system flexibility, ease of coding. The scaling for multiple resolutions was pretty darn seamless. We have enabled a calibration feature, so there was a whole process involved with coming up with ways that parents could do that using objects that they have around the house. Touch responses was a whole undiscovered territory that has been really, really useful. Much less hassle for parents, many more recruitment options. Weaknesses, the data access is still a little bit cumbersome, so it takes a fair amount of work to pull things down and get it into a form you can analyze, especially if, like me, you made multiple versions of the experiment as you were going. So hindsight is 2020, I won't do that again. And it can be a little bit difficult to control object placement and eccentricity, but worth it when you get a working prototype that you really, really like. So although the pros in general far outweigh the cons, there may be special consideration needed if you suspect your experimental effects could be influenced by screen size. So that's all really I want to present. I just wanted to say thank you, especially to my graduate students, for their willingness to test over and over and over and over. I can't even imagine how many times they've played these versions of the games and the downloadable versions over the years. So that is pretty much it. I will head over to the speaker corner and take questions if anybody has any. Thank you.